18 of the Senteon and CIS webinar series, a deep dive into the CIS benchmarks. I'm your host, Zach Krumkowski, over from Senteon. We got Rich McGraw from CIS, and we have a very special guest, our first vendor appearance, Jimmy Hatzel from CyberQP. How we doing, guys?
Wonderful.
Excellent. Excited to be here with Jimmy and yourself, Zach.
I appreciate it. I'm definitely interested to hear the vendor perspective on some of these settings, but before we get into control panel and laps and a little bit about how CyberQP is innovating this area of the benchmarks, Jimmy, I've seen posts on you all over LinkedIn. You just talked at DattoCon? How was that?
Yeah, it was great. It was great. We were out in Miami, so I got back late last night. I'm always
just in time for a webinar.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, oh, let's do the day after DattoCon. Yeah, it was an awesome event. Talked to tons of MSPs. There's actually a lot of talk on compliance and CIS. I think that the education in the community has tremendously improved over the past 365 days. If you actually look at a post that I did a year ago on my DattoCon recap, one of the things that I called out specifically was MSPs are a lot better educated on security, and a prediction that I should pull up that post. A prediction that I made.
We should link that.
Yeah, I should pull it up. The prediction was that it was going to continue. I don't know if I did or not mention CIS in it, but I feel like I may have. I'll say I did until somebody proves me wrong. You got to do a lot of scrolling to find that. So.
That's interesting. So that's a trend you're seeing is even today when compliance is brought up, is CIS come up in the same vein, or is CIS and compliance still different or separate topics?
So I think that, say 3-4 years ago, you didn't really get asked questions about your internal security that much. You did by some security conscious MSPs, but it wasn't that often. Now it's like every third person. And maybe a year ago, people started to ask questions, but they didn't know what to ask, right? It was a very common thing. What's your security like?
Sure.
That type of thing. And even like I got tons of questions related to compliance over the past couple years with a lack of background understanding on what it means, for example. So like often get questions like, are you CMMC compliant, or are you CIS compliant, right? Where if someone who like lives and dies in that space all the time, that's not really like the right
question
to ask, or the way to phrase it. Like, what controls do you help meet would be like a better way to ask that. And I'm not getting like the regular questions on like what controls do you help meet yet, but people are asking like, can you help us comply with CMMC, or can you help us meet these specific things? And then I can say, here is a mapping of our controls to CIS or to NIST or whatever, and then that conversation is happening a lot more. So the education, there's still a lot of ways to go, certainly, but the knowledge gap between where we need to be and where we are has improved.
That's awesome to hear. And I want to call out, and if we do have any CyberQP marketing in the audience, you guys did an awesome documentation on where you guys fit actually into these CIS controls. So elaborating a little bit on this and giving CyberQP credit, because you actually spawned us to do something similar at Senteon. When they're getting questions of, where do you fit in this control? Are MSPs understanding that these controls fit into the regulated frameworks, or is that still a step that needs to be made?
I would say people who really understand the controls know that, but I still think the average person working at an MSP may not know the difference between a control, a regulation, a framework, a mandate. Yeah. It's not really that.
I wanted to thank Jimmy in particular for hosting and organizing the fantastic forum, which CyberQP put together and was 100% focused on CIS. We had senior leadership there. I was planning on attending myself, but it didn't work out personally. Next time I'll make it. But I think that was the first vendor sponsored CIS conference. So that's awesome. Thank you.
Well, yeah, thanks for mentioning it. We had a blast there. We're actually planning next year already, so
Great. I will be there.
there's gonna be a couple of them next year. So
Excellent.
looking forward to
Well, I
seeing.
know Phyllis and, Phyllis Lee, who's one of our senior executives, she went and said it was fantastic.
Fits the name.
Yeah, she killed it too.
And talking towards that again, you're talking about the trends at DattoCon and even the vendor trend of you having a trade show focused around CIS. What kind of feedback are you hearing post that show? Is that show more to bring awareness, or is that really people who are already in it improving? Who really cares about CIS is what I'm trying to understand.
Usually there is one or two security experts in MSPs with maybe 10 or more employees who really care about it. That's what I found. There's an internal CISO, VP of security, director of information security, or something like that. That title, that's the person usually grilling me. Separate from that, if you have MSPs who target heavily regulated verticals, they generally have a strong grasp of cybersecurity frameworks, benchmarks, controls, all of that.
Yeah, I think the drivers for, certainly the drivers for organization by organization are different. Maybe it's CMMC for someone and, maybe it's something else for someone else. But, everyone kind of gets to that point where they need to, kind of shore up the house, so to speak. And CIS is here to help along with CyberQP and Senteon to really help provide that guidance, whether you're trying to comply to a particular framework or regulation, we're here to help.
Yeah. And to wrap up the Fantastic Forum, which was an awesome event, I was happy to be there. You already talked about planning the next year's event and next two events, it sounds like. Is it going to be CIS themed again? And if it is, are MSPs pushing for you to have it CIS themed, or is that a company choice?
Yeah, we definitely had a big push from attendees to have a sort of part 2 where we can continue the workshop aspects. So we're working on that right now. There's a big ask for breakout sessions as well, where maybe someone who's attending for the first time can do the workshops on the first. I think we meant to do the first 5 controls. I think we got to 3 or 4.
They're pretty in depth.
Yeah. So then people can continue that on that path and their learning journey. So we're working through the logistics now. We'll be ready to announce something hopefully very soon.
We'll stay in touch, Jimmy, because I can tee up some speakers.
Great.
That's awesome. I think my favorite part was the actual MSP speakers sharing their experience. So today's topic, we're going to be diving deep into control panel settings and laps. But I guess one more thing I want to understand before we do that. Your talk at DattoCon, what was the topic? I mean, you talked about the trends and what you're seeing in MSPs, but what did you actually talk about?
I was talking about zero standing privilege, which is relevant to our conversation today. It's funny, before we got on, Rich is like, man, we should turn off all these local admin accounts. We don't. Which is like exactly what my talk was about. It's about like, hey, let's move away from this culture of everyone should have admin access to everything, or I'm CEO, so I need admin access to everything. Move to a zero standing privilege model where if you need admin access, you get it for a specific amount of time and then it's taken away from you. And if you're changing, help fixing backup on a server, use backup admin permissions in the built-in security groups instead of domain admin for everything you do. So
single domain with laps.
Yeah. And I talked a lot about the spectrum too that MSPs are on.
Sure.
This is actually what we're talking about today is part of that spectrum. We have a password that everyone in our organization knows, and every single one of our end users has that password as an admin account on their computer, which is true. Many MSPs still do that. I wouldn't say many, but in the past, it was kind of what everyone did. Now people are still doing it. to like the second level of maturity, which is randomly generated passwords across all clients, right? To the third level of maturity, which is like named accounts, but you have like every tech has an admin account on every server and every machine, which is just so much standing privilege. And then level 4, what we're talking about today, is like lapse, essentially, but rotating passwords, constantly changing passwords. And then like my case was to move people into the next level of a zero standing privilege model and using just-in-time accounts and getting away from having standing admin accounts just out there with a password protecting it when you could just deactivate it.
It's not going to cause disruption if it's not being used and it's set up appropriately.
Yeah.
Hey, I want to call out Jean-Marc's comment. CIS aligns well to NIST. Thank you very much, Jean. You are correct. A lot of people that need to comply to NIST will actually use the CIS controls as their roadmap while they're trying to comply to NIST, because it's prioritized into implementation groups, the CIS controls, that is, and it's a very logical and prioritized roadmap, and many people will use the CIS controls for NIST compliance. Thank you, John. Mark?
Yep. And it's funny, you talk about the access and privileges. I think one of our most popular episodes was one we did with Ray Orzini and Ken Murr. It was a 2-parter. But user rights assignments is something we talk about in all of these. And it's tough, right? It's hard for MSPs to know who needs what privilege. But I think just like we're talking about today, there's some that are no brainers, right? There's stuff that we can do, level 1, level 2, like you were saying. This level 4 stuff is more mature, but still possible, right? And we'll let CyberQP talk a little bit about how they're innovating this space in the benchmarks towards the end.
Sure.
But, yeah. So I guess transitioning over. So a lot of these CIS benchmarks, say it every week, these are really proactive, preventative steps. And end of the day, they are recommendations. They're cross-mapping across NIST, other regulated frameworks, PCI, HIPAA, FFIEC, and whatnot. So it's really cool getting to talk about these and hear these straight from the experts like Jimmy here today. So with that, let's transition a little bit into the topic. So we have control panel and lapse. Jimmy, at the highest level, can you introduce a little bit about what these two topics are and I guess why a business has them?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, control panel, which less live and breathe in than say lapse, is basically the settings for your computer, like standard settings. And there's a bunch of like basic cyber hygiene stuff that you'd think would be turned off or turned on or whatever default in Windows, and it's just not. So the control panel hardening recommendations are all like, yeah, we'll get to it, but like,
yeah, we'll get to the exact ones.
Like maybe your camera shouldn't be able to be accessed while the computer's locked. Like, I don't know, maybe people shouldn't be able to spy on you, things like that. And then all the lapse are about this thing called local account password solution.
Is it admin or is it account? I don't know.
Local admin password solution.
Yep. There we go. Which every Windows computer, when you get it, there's the built-in administrator account. And if you join that computer to a domain, basically you can have admin privileges on the individual machine, which is independent of the domain, using that built-in administrator account or another local admin account that's created on that computer. And so Microsoft created a solution called Lapse, where basically you can manage the passwords and have a lot better cyber hygiene for these accounts through in a domain environment, and actually access the passwords on the domain controller or through Active Directory, I should say, that instead of it just being on the local machine and doing some like password changing and randomly generating that kind of stuff. So there's a bunch of settings related to that. The way you can have the password changing or whatever, or you can have it accessed from the domain from Active Directory. But if you aren't setting up a secure password policy, then it's sort of like a useless thing. Like, yeah, maybe your password changes once every 5 years, right?
Sure. Yeah.
And the password, there's no restrictions on it, and the password's password, and changes it to password 1. Like, that's not going to help you. So you need
Mm-hmm.
to, like we'll go through them all, but it's things like complex passwords,
Yep.
expiration, those types of things.
And again, keeping this strictly educational, I'll ask the pointed question. This lapse is an additional security measure. This has no direct impact on just the general users. This is a protocol for the admins. Is that right? Am I understanding this?
Yes. Well, so that's under the assumption that individual users don't have admin rights.
Okay.
So basically, through your CIS journey, when you get to Control 18, if you're doing them in order, then you probably at some point have taken away local admin rights from all of the ordinary users.
Mm-hmm.
And even the CEOs who really want it because they don't want to have to call you to install Adobe Reader. You should.
You don't want to submit a ticket for a new software that can change GPOs and have updates and everything else.
Yeah. But if functionally these are like dormant accounts that are used in a break glass situation. So give you a
Okay.
perfect example. A hardware vendor, I forget which laptop it was, so I'm not gonna
Sure.
call
No
anyone
worries.
out because it might be the wrong one. One of the big ones. They gave out a particular model of a laptop, and the Wi-Fi cards in all of them broke in. I forget if it was a Windows update or if it was a driver update, whatever it was. But you had to manually roll back the update to the Wi-Fi card or the network card or whatever it was. And the only way to do that was using the local admin password, because it was joined to a domain, it couldn't connect to the domain, and like it's a whole thing. So because it couldn't access the internet. So like MSPs and IT professionals usually have this local admin as this sort of break glass situation. It's an
Understood.
emergency. I just need to get into the computer to fix this thing and override the settings. It's like the hard code, the almost backdoor, if you will, but like a really, you want a really secure backdoor. So that's like functionally what they're used for. They should not be used as a day-to-day account. Like you
Okay.
don't need to be, definitely don't use like a built-in administrator account as your day-to-day account. And like you don't.
We've never seen that either, right? That's not something that happens in our industry.
Yeah. It's like it's like logging in as root in
Right on.
yeah, and most of the times your interaction with an admin account is done through like user access control settings, where basically you get that pop up and says like, hey, do you want to run this program as admin? So it's like the functionally these accounts that Laps are interacting with are like dormant accounts that aren't used on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah, I'd like to add it's, Laps is pretty cool tech. Circa 2015. I mean, it's been out for a while now, and it can offer some nice control, and being able to rotate those passwords is very, very important. But there's also limitations, and CyberQP helps out with some of those limitations, and we'll learn more about that. But I mean, this is old tech. Unfortunately, it came out in Ignite in 2015, so we're talking about the issues weren't necessarily the same in 2015 as they are now.
Yep. And to expand one more, then giving CyberQP the shout out, Microsoft didn't build these with the intention of serving managed service providers. This multi-tenant aspect is definitely a huge value prop. So before we really get into the topic today, Jimmy, is there anything more you want to mention on that?
Well, and also like local account passwords aren't the only passwords you need to regularly rotate and change, right?
Yep.
Domain admin passwords, if they're shared, service accounts, right? That's not tied to a specific user. Those passwords need to be changed regularly, which is often a requirement or mandate in insurance policies. And then also, if there's any other shared accounts, anything like a Azure AD, like tenant login for one of your customers that's shared among your techs. Like this is important stuff for MSPs because they are constantly sharing accounts. Whereas in a enterprise environment or say mid-market IT environment, it's usually just like the local accounts that's shared because you don't want to have a million local accounts on the machine. the service accounts are not tied to a specific user and there's a hard-coded password.
Oh yeah, that could be a topic of its own.
yeah.
So, all right, that's a perfect introduction. So let's stop into our first slide. So attackers are definitely going to be using leveraging laps if it's not set up appropriately to take advantage of that environment. So we have a couple techniques listed on the screen here. The first two I think are going to regard more around that control panel. You mentioned this a little bit: unauthorized visual surveillance, unauthorized audio surveillance. Why are those listed here for today's topic?
Well, everyone has a webcam on their computer. Not everyone, but most people have a webcam. And then most people have a microphone on their computer. I'm using mine right now. And these have great purposes, like doing, this
right here
right now, right? This live cast. Or things like accessibility, right? You need some people can't type in a keyboard, so they need speech to text or control their computer with their voice instead. But they can also be exploited, right? If somebody has access to your webcam when they're not supposed to, that's bad. If people have access to your microphone when they're not supposed to, that's also bad. And if you have your computer locked and you think you're safe from these types of things, right? Like we've all been nervous about it. And I think a lot of people experienced it in 2020 where you left your Zoom open while you were, you thought you were on mute or something. There's certain settings that have legitimate uses or would protect you from legitimate software and also malicious software. So like, I don't want to get into it too much, but like protecting yourself and making sure that when your computer's locked, these types of things are locked down, whether from exploit or legitimate uses.
Yep, spot on. And we'll cover the settings to better mitigate the risk of that happening. The other ones on the screen here, I think we all are very familiar with brute force attacks. Those can be very automated to make sure you have a incorrect password limit, so forth. But a couple of these other ones, privilege escalation, I feel is something not talked about enough. And this specifically is through credential exposure. So I think this is probably tying back to what you introduced with the Active Directory and so forth. But talk to us a little bit about privilege escalation and why it's important to strongly configure laps if you are indeed using it.
Yeah, well, so if you privilege escalation is right, you start as one type of user and you're trying to get higher privileges. So a local admin is like, you made it, right? Like you can do whatever you want to the computer. So you need to heavily protect that account. So if you have lots of admin accounts enabled, that is increasing your threat vector. If you have a weak local admin password and somebody dumps the memory or something like that, and they get a hash of the password, or they take it from a keystroke, or you have a local admin password on one computer and it's the same on another computer. It makes it a lot easier for an attacker to do these privilege escalation techniques. And it might not be using that local admin account, right? So like say that I have my Jimmy local account on the computer, and Zach is monitoring the local admin account or the built-in administrator or Zach's admin account, Zach's MSP admin account. Now, if I only use Zach's admin account to give myself local admin privileges, I can get around a lot of detection. And sure, yeah, he could be monitoring for, that exact thing happening. But the logs of me, going in and exfiltrating data and doing all of that stuff are happening on my account, right? My stolen account or my account that I'm impersonating someone else, because I was able to escalate my privileges to a higher level.
Yep. No, that's spot on. Perfect explanation on that. And thanks for that in-depth analysis on it. So one other one I want to call out here, prolonged unauthorized access. So AKA the bad actor has now gathered persistence on the device, right? They can stay on there. They're going to do what they want as long as they evade detection, like you were talking about. They have as long as they want to win. So could you talk to us a little bit about, why we don't want unauthorized access, but more importantly, why strongly configuring laps can mitigate the risk of them getting in the first place?
Yeah, let's say that I talked about this earlier, but let's say you have an MSP and your password is a specific formula for every single device out there. And you don't want to change it because it's so easy to just go in and fix the computers. You just pull up, you're in the office. They're like, my printer's not working. I need Adobe Reader. I keep picking on Adobe Reader. I need whatever software. And you're just like, boop, boop, boop. Let me type in the password. Somebody looks over your shoulder. That password's never changed. Attackers can continue logging in that account for over and over and over and over again. Additionally, which I don't know if we covered or not, which is definitely covered in other controls like lockout settings.
It's covered somewhere else. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's not necessarily the same thing here, but like, let's say, we've all seen Matt Lee taking pictures of people with their computers open, which, you should lock it right away. But if you have,
especially at airports lately, he's been fun with his LinkedIn shots.
I think he had one at a security event too recently, or a couple, which is just asking for it.
Especially with Matt around.
Yeah. But if you don't have like a lock computer setting at like a reasonable amount of time, like 1 minute, 5 minutes, something like that. I don't know. Matt Lee probably sets his like 20 seconds and taps the space bar to keep it open.
He has to personally at this point.
Yeah, but like the functional version of that is, let's say you have a server in a data closet at a place, whatever, in a basement somewhere, and someone logged in that server in the morning and there's no auto lock setting. And then 2 days later, 3 days later, someone physically accesses that computer and just logs in. So, if the password's constantly changing, the account's locking all the time, you have some additional mitigations between preventing prolonged access.
Yep.
Eliminate that persistence best as possible, at least monthly.
And that's what CIS is here to do. Better be proactive and preventative. So let's, I want to make sure you have time at the end to kind of talk a little bit about CyberQP and how you're enhancing this lapse process. So, Rich, if it's all right with you, I'm going to jump straight into the settings. I think every week you can hear what CIS is on any of the other episodes. So let's pull up that first setting here. Prevent enabling the lock screen camera is set to enabled. Jimmy, is there any scenario you would want your camera on, but your computer locked?
No, I mean, maybe if you're trying to like catch someone in the act of something and like
that's a good use case.
I don't know. Like I like if you have like a baby monitor situation, maybe, I don't know, but like you really should just turn this off. Like it seems silly that this is on by default.
I'm gonna. I'm a little extra on that. I actually use a USB webcam and microphone sort of thing. My personal policy is just to unplug the USB.
There you go.
Yep. No, I think that's spot on. And I don't think we need to spend too much time on this setting. So in the same vein of this next setting, again, these control panel settings are messing with what is allowed to happen when the screen is actually locked. So preventing the ability for a lock screen slideshow is set to enabled. Now, this doesn't sound like it's too much of a security risk. There might be some photos, people walk by, more of a physical risk, I guess. But is there anything more to this setting, Jimmy?
Well, I'll give you one. In 2011 or 2012, I think, this is totally unrelated to Windows, by the way.
Before lapse.
Yeah. Mac or Apple defaulted on everyone's Apple TV that whoever's account was signed in started playing a slideshow of their photos. And so, what happens with teenagers in households is they usually set up the Apple TVs for their parents, and then the Apple account is usually linked to their photos. And then you have a bunch of teenagers' photos.
Teenage nightmare is what that is.
Yeah. So that's the situations that pop into my head. I mean, there's and it's like resource usage as well. Like,
sure.
Like you don't need to be burning your mining Bitcoins by showing You could be mining Bitcoins instead. I don't know.
But you're spot on. I mean, this is just a better, almost a physical security precaution to mitigate private data or images getting out. I mean, in the place, I mean, I love the story, but I mean, in a business, I can't imagine you're going to get someone from customer service. I have to have this scrolling when I take my lunch so people know more about my life. Like, I don't feel you could create a strong argument to allow
I mean, you
this.
can open a ticket, but I don't know. Probably not.
Yep. All right, we got one, or actually we got a couple more control panel, but this next one here, allow users to enable online speech recognition services. Now this one's a little bit more interesting here, especially with all the progress with AI and everything. But Jimmy, we recommend to disable this. Give us a little context on this setting.
Yeah, I mean, you can control a computer with your voice. So like there's exploits that could be that we don't know about, right? Like somebody, maybe they say like I don't know, like / delete, you know, and like deletes an SQL table. I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
Or like the old like phone like playing the tones. Like
Yep.
it's just another thing that can be exploited.
Freaking.
And then you think of like Alexa too, like all
Oh,
the
yeah.
stories of kids ordering like thousands of dollars worth of Legos and Cheez-Its from their like Alexas. Like
The palette showing up at the door.
yeah, like you already have a keyboard and you have a mouse, which like people can, you know, do some serious damage with. You don't need a microphone too. Like just turn that off.
Yep, absolutely. If there's not a good reason, why let Microsoft have the ability?
Well,
All right,
also, what do they do? Like, your voice could end up in training data too. Like, especially with all the AI stuff. Like, I mean, not to get too crazy, but like, you know, like Patriot Act stuff. Like, you know.
Oh yeah. Yep. All right, not to spend too much time on these control panel ones, because I think the bulk of this is going to take place in laps. So this last setting here is simply allow online tips is set to disabled. Now, this one's a little interesting to me. You know, intuitively, I maybe think an attacker can send a fake executable through an online tip. I'm not too sure, but what's your point of view on this setting here in the recommendation?
It actually makes me remember like the first time I realized how important it was to update a computer, and this was like Windows, I don't know, 95 or Windows Me maybe, and there was a vulnerability in the default installed version of Windows. I tried to look this up earlier. I couldn't even find what it was, but I remember it. And basically, hackers
Scraped off the web, man. Microsoft doesn't need more stories.
Yeah, right. Like the spammers could exploit the built-in notification system that they had, and it would be like you'd log in, there'd be like 500 notifications. You had to click. And I remember being like years and years and years ago, thinking like, how do I get rid of this? Right? Like, why do I have to click all these boxes every time? And it's like, you know, you want a prize, like enlarge your fingers, you know, like things like that. And then I updated Windows and like it went away, and I was like, oh wow, that's why you update things. But like, I don't know, that could happen again, or it's just another thing connecting to the internet too.
I think that's exactly right. You know, this is, again, all of these steps are take more preventative measures, and that's just reducing the unnecessary network traffic or potential exposure to unverified content, right?
Yeah.
So absolutely agree with the recommendation of disable. All right, we're going to transition over to laps, but Rich, do you have any comments on any of those control panel settings a little bit deeper?
Well, first off, I noticed Jimmy does have very large hands, so I want to maybe we should drill down on that. No, nothing additional. You know, it's CIS tries to make the proper recommendations to just minimize the attack surface, and you know, turning off your microphone and camera and, you know, in your lock screen and all that stuff it's just basic cybersecurity hygiene, and really everyone should follow it. Sorry, Jimmy.
No.
No, that's perfect. So, all right, we are going to get into this transition into the more impactful topic, in my opinion, but laps. So CIS does recommend to ensure this is actually installed. So again, a lot of these settings and these recommendations are not there by default. Jimmy hinted at this at the beginning, but by default, a Windows workstation is only going to be about 20% compliant with CIS. So very unsecure. That's why you need solutions like Senteon and CyberQP to build that up, build that barrier, build that wall. So Jimmy, again, focusing on the Microsoft laps, before we give you a chance to talk about CyberQP, what's the, I guess, quickly remind us the importance of laps and why CIS recommends this is in place.
Yeah, again, don't want to beat it to death, but you need to moving target defense, constantly changing the password for these local admin accounts, these dormant accounts. You need to install it first. You need to install the right package to get it going. So this is a step in that process.
Yep. Perfect. Now we're going to go into some of those recommendations to make sure this stays secured. So the first one here is to not allow password expiration time longer than required by policy is set to enabled. This, a lot of these GPOs here, sometimes they can fight each other if they're set locally. Maybe they're group settings to where you can only set this if this is in place.
And Zach, I'll point out that policy will typically map back to your framework or your overall framework, whether that's the CIS controls or something else. But I think that's sort of the guiding policy, and then these are the specific settings.
Mm-hmm. So talk to us a little bit about this recommendation.
Yeah, well, so you have your password policy for your domain, and then you want to make sure that everything's following that. So local, I'm not sure entirely, but my hunch is this will have a little bit to do with overriding the domain password policy with local passwords. Yeah, exactly. So you could, if you didn't enable this, have a domain password policy of change passwords every 90 days because you're mandated by whatever your mandate is, or it's your policy in your organization. And then local is excluded from the domain settings. So this is basically just including these things in scope.
Yep. Making sure these are actually in place. And the big thing is maintaining that password hygiene. So spot on explanation. So this next one here, especially in MSPs where both of us really focus, enable local admin password management is set to enabled. You hinted a little bit at this earlier. Some of these lapse recommendations and these escalating privileges and so forth, they do create a little bit more work on the engineers. But Jimmy, why is this important to do either way and just bite the bullet and make sure you are taking the right steps?
Yeah, I mean, this is just turning it on, right? So you want to be able to manage the passwords at the domain level for the local machines. And again, by default, you install it. You got to actually turn it on too. So the rest of the settings will work.
Installed and sitting there. Shelfware, I think, is what we call that one.
Yeah.
It's got to be beyond to rotate the passwords, right? You don't want to block yourself out.
Mm-hmm. So keeping that enabled is good. So let's go into a little bit more in depth into the actual password creation recommendations. So the first one here, password complexity. I don't know if Laps lets you customize these rules at all. Maybe you can shed light. I know it's not necessarily exactly what you guys are focusing on, but they do have some of these predetermined rules listed on the screen here. So why is it important to have a complex password?
I mean, it's brute force, right? So if you don't the more complex the password, the harder it is to crack. NTLM hashes are there's rainbow tables of every password list for them. So then there's rainbow tables for a lot of weak passwords too, and then you could brute force in if it's not complex. So basically, this password policy ensures that you're in that million years of a supercomputer trying to crack it category to actually guess the hash versus a potential known password or 1 year or something like that.
Yeah. And Rich, I know you love to read about some of these attacker methodologies. I'm sure you've seen plenty of cracking tools that can potentially overcome this, and they're just automated tools, right?
I have them on my laptop, Zach. Yeah. I don't use them maliciously, but they're not hard to get.
Yep. Oh, that's spot on. This next setting here is interesting to me because it is the password length, which is recommended to be 15 or more. Calling out a previous CIS recommendation at the local account level for the users, the recommendation is 14 characters. So kind of interesting that CIS recommended a little bit more here. But Jimmy,
Well,
Rich, I'll let both of you talk a little bit towards this one.
Well, that it's interesting. That one character makes a difference in terms of, quantum computing power required to crack the password hash. So, small things do matter, and it really is making that password much more secure in general to have that long string or even a passphrase.
Yeah, and I was about to just look up the difference between 14 and 15 because it's like a magnet. It's a massive, massive magnet.
It is.
But again, this is just a continuation from the last one of like your password settings. Like
You
need
need
them.
two quantum computers versus one.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. So that's why it's there. I mean, it's pretty straightforward.
Yeah, no, spot on. And there's actually only one more setting for us to talk about going into today. So we left plenty of time to really get an overview of what Jimmy's doing with CyberQP and innovating this space.
Yes.
So this last setting here, password setting to the age. So this 30 or fewer, that sounds kind of painful for an MSP to do something this often. But again,
Painful without automation, right, Jimmy? I mean, this
Yes,
is the setting that eliminates that persistence. So when someone's account is compromised, they're not going to sit there and sell that access and have a back door open to your environment. So this just by rotating that password on a frequent basis, 30 days or less, you're locking out the bad guys if they've already gained access. And you're absolutely right, Zach. Making this change happen on a monthly basis is complex, and you can do it wrong. Yeah, I mean, there's ways to mess that up, but Jimmy can help you out with that. He's got your back.
Well, and just to call back from the last one, I didn't find the difference between 14 and 15 characters, but between 14 and 16 characters on an NTLM hash is 14 is 5 billion, almost 6 billion years, and 16 characters is 174 trillion years.
quite
So,
the X multiple.
Thank
yeah,
goodness.
so
When those cryogenics kick in, you want to be safe.
yeah, again, that's at current computing power, so things change over time. Yeah, who knows? In like 5 years from now, there could be some major breakthrough with quantum. We're like, I could crack that on my
Few
phone.
seconds, yeah, on your phone.
Yeah.
Oh,
You never
spot
know.
on. So just diving a little bit more into the setting before switching gears. But again,
It's
Jimmy,
how often it changes. It's how often
Yep.
it changes. So a lot of our partners set it daily.
Oh,
Lots of
wow.
people, yeah, I mean, well, especially if it's a shared account. So if it's a shared account,
Excellent.
there's lots of people accessing it, then daily is preferred. If it's a local admin on a machine and it's only like a break glass thing, then 30 days is probably fine.
So what do you do, Jimmy? If you're changing that daily, do you just pump the password out in a Slack channel or something? How do you do it?
Yeah, we post it on LinkedIn automatically. Yeah.
Nice. Make it easy.
Yeah.
no, that makes sense and perfect explanation. So, all right, let's switch gears. So these were all the CIS benchmarks that directly recommend to use the Microsoft Labs tool. Today's episode, a little bit different. We're saving a lot of time here at the end, so Jimmy can introduce CyberQP to our viewers. We will, Henry, actually, let's still pull up some of those interactive Q&A slides. I did pre-make these for us to look at because I feel these questions are a little bit difficult to handle in Labs, and maybe CyberQP plays a role. So, Jimmy, could you strike up this first one? So, the balance between user convenience and security, especially when you're implementing something like a Labs solution like CyberQP, and go ahead and kick off the answer to this with an overview of what CyberQP is.
Sure. I mean, like, talking specifically MSPs here, you have a lot of customers with a lot of devices, and you have a lot of that all have admin credentials, local admin credentials, or
In different domains or different tenants, if you will.
Exactly. And then you have a lot of different technicians that need to access those passwords. So doing that easily and securely is not a simple task.
It's a complex problem.
Yeah, and so that is like, because it is functionally hard, having all of the passwords just be the same is what people did initially, and then
Jimmy, question. In your experience, when something's functionally hard, what do people do?
they don't do it. They
They
just
don't do it.
they don't do it. Exactly.
True story. So, that's just facts. If it's a daunting challenge, it gets ignored.
Yeah, and so MSPs all have RMMs, and so you can script password changes without lapse, right? And a lot of MSPs will do this if they want to update the password in their own documentation tool or in their PSA, which I do not recommend because it's probably stored in a not encrypted file. But if the device is offline, if something updates, if whatever it is, like, it's a script to maintain, and there could be security flaws in it. It's not vetted code, that kind of thing.
It might not hit every machine.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
sure?
Well, it just won't. Like, say you run it every day at midnight, like, not every end user machine's gonna be on. It's just
Nope. If you got 80%, you'd be doing well.
yeah, exactly. So then you need to be able to handle all of those things, and yeah, so it's just it's not easy.
And
But
I,
yeah, so basically CyberQP, our privileged access management product, QGuard automates this whole process. So we can work with local accounts and essentially be a replacement for Lapse. But we can also work with domain accounts like domain admins, service accounts, and then also Azure AD, Entra ID, Office 365 admin, whatever we are calling it today. Entra ID is actually.
We could call it modern lapse on steroids.
There you go. Yeah, yeah. So we will help people automatically. The MSPs basically automatically rotate those passwords.
Can you talk
And
about that process just in a tiny bit more detail? Because that is really the complicated part.
sure. So basically, you set up a CyberQP tenant. You deploy us out, and we actually help with the discovery and the import of the admin passwords.
Nice. Discovery is so important.
Yep. So, you go through that whole process, and we'll actually match it up with documentation tools that MSP have. They have like Hoodoo or IT Glue. Make sure the assets match up. If they don't, create them, or you can store things in our vault as well. And then we'll set up the policy, which is the management, which we talked about before, enabling management. So you can disable accounts, change the rotation settings for them, that kind of thing. The password policies will still be mandated by group policy, but we'll actually read that to ensure that we're matching that. And then we basically have an agent on the machine that will update the password, and then it will tell the source of truth, whether that be your IT Glue instance, your Hoodoo instance, or our vault, what the new password is. And if it can't communicate with that, it will actually default back to the previous password and give an alert that it was a failure and retry later.
Nice.
And like, you can set the settings however you want per client, per account type. So like, you might have your local admins rotating once every 5 days, your service accounts once every 30 days, and then your domain admins rotating every day if they're a shared domain admin account. And there's going to
That's
be
how to maintain security posture right there.
yeah, and there's get like there's a bit of vagueness on like how to deal with shared admin accounts, right? But it's every MSP uses it. So like
Which makes it a big attack surface.
yeah,
Because
exactly.
the bad guys know that. That's not a secret.
It's usually like you guys don't know better than me what exactly it is in CIS, but like most like frameworks or requirements or any regulatory agencies will be like, avoid shared accounts. But if you're using shared accounts, do take precautionary measures to secure them. And it's like, okay, well, what does that mean?
That's not. That's not. That's a. That's. I don't know what that is.
Yeah.
It's a dart at a board, right?
Well, nobody wants to tell you like if you're going to use a shared domain admin account, here's how you protect it, because no one wants you to use them. And we're actually pushing for that too, and moving to zero standing privilege. So in that same software, we can also do just-in-time accounts, where instead of having these accounts enabled, which maybe you do, maybe you have one account, break glass account enabled that is limited to access to one person or two people.
Yeah, and that's stored in the credential vault somewhere, right?
Exactly. It's locked down, but not the day-to-day access. But if Zach needs to go log in a server to do something, having don't let Zach in your server, right?
He should never have any type of segmented access. Just
Yeah.
Stop you there.
So if you did need to get in, basically with our software, we could automatically, based on predetermined access. So Zach has access to create admin accounts on these clients because he has this permission level and these specific machines. He can go in, provision himself an admin account, and it's only active for a pre-amount set of time. So say, 4 hours, domain admin, the reason for it,
Nice.
ticket number, XYZ.
I love that time window.
Yeah, lower that time with 20 minutes, 5 minutes.
No, I said I love the time window.
Oh, love
just
the
be able
time
to
window.
control
I
that.
thought you said with Zach, you got to lower that time.
Also true.
This is all really interesting. I love the usability about understanding your end client and which users need what type of privilege and access. I mean, this goes into the user rights assignments that CIS recommends, and you're executing it at the lapse level. So that's really cool. But I want to switch gear. I think that's a really good grasp on what you do. But why was there such a need for this innovation?
Yeah, fair enough. So lapse is great, but it's basically works in a single domain environment. And if you're an MSP or even an IT provider, like it's not functionally great for operations to set this up in every single domain that you have for MSPs, or B, grab your passwords, these local account passwords from AD, when all of your other documentation is stored in a vault somewhere, or secret server, or a documentation tool, or something like that. Also working with multi-accounts, so it's not just local accounts that you need to protect. This is especially true for MSPs, but also service accounts is a huge one, because service accounts aren't tied to an individual user. They have a password. Software is using that password. Tasks are using that password. Password should be updated. Attackers can wreak havoc with service accounts, and it is a classic privilege escalation technique of someone having an ordinary account and then getting a hold of a service account, or finding an exploit in a service to provision themselves an admin account, using that service account, that type of thing. So you need the same functionality of lapse for the passwords changing and rotating for service accounts, but also any shared domain accounts or Office 365 accounts.
That sounds like you're addressing an awesome problem there.
Yeah, and doing it on multi-tenant basis too. So being
Yep.
able to, if you're an MSP, you got a lot of clients. So being able to manage them all from one place, deploy software programmatically through your RMM versus configuring it each time.
And if you are looking for compliance, if you do need to comply to whatever framework that is your industry, CyberQP helps with that, and Senteon, right?
Appreciate it. So you mentioned one other thing when you were first introducing what you guys do. And this is a challenge that Senteon comes in front. So for the audience, Senteon does have the ability to implement about 900 security recommendations from CIS. That's a lot of settings that could be changing on an environment. So, and if they're not already doing this, you're basically adding additional labor to the MSP's workload, because not doing it all, even if doing it is easy with a solution like CyberQP or Senteon, not doing it all is still less work.
And
So
what I love about Senteon, Zach, is 900 settings is a lot of configuration, right?
a lot.
So automation is key, but let's say, all right, we're going to turn on 900 settings and press go. What's going to break? So Senteon does a really nice job of kind of doing that discovery work and understanding, if I press go on 900 settings, what's going to
What's
break,
going to break?
and that's really key. And
No,
I
I
love that
really
about Senteon.
appreciate that shout out. That's exactly the innovation. But my question for you, Jimmy, it's hard, right? Even if it, how do you overcome when the MSP says, I haven't been doing this in the past, it was too hard. Now there's a solution that makes it easier, but why do it? I haven't been doing it. Why do it now?
Well, I mean, cybersecurity is a journey, not a destination. It's a process. It's not a product.
It's
So
an
like,
evolution.
yeah, it's an evolution. Like you guys say this all the time, especially with CIS. Like you're not going to get everything in your first go.
No,
Like make incremental improvements. Just
you're
because you
minimizing risk,
yeah,
and
exactly.
take the best steps that you can. You're not going to minimize all risk, unfortunately. Not likely anyway. But if you can take the best steps possible to minimize what is known risk, do it.
And I think like one thing I've been stressing more recently is as an MSP business owner, which hopefully there's some out there listening, or IT professionals too, like create a culture of security in your organization and lead with it. So like don't sweep under the rug and just pretend it's not a problem that you have the same admin password on every device and it's just never been changed. Like
It will bite you.
yeah,
One matter of
exactly.
time.
Like address it and work on it and make a plan, and maybe it starts with scripting a change to all of them, right, just to start.
Yep.
And then after a couple months or weeks or days, whatever, then it moves to turning laps on, then it moves to on your most critical machines, right, and then it moves to rolling out cyber QP to your every single
Yep.
customer to get them all doing that, right? Like
Yeah, I love that, Jimmy, because that is incremental. And I was just saying how, applying 900 settings at once. Obviously, no one's ever going to do that, and it's not recommended. But the incremental approach that you're describing, Jimmy, is absolutely the way to do it for sure.
I mean, I don't think anyone will have their life seriously inconvenienced if they turn off camera access when their screen is locked today. So maybe
Those control panel recommendations, just do it.
Just start with that
That's
one.
your biggest issue. You're doing pretty darn good.
No, that's spot on. And we're getting close to the wrap up comments here, trying to hold it straight to the hour. But Jimmy, thanks for being a guest. Did absolutely incredible. But with the last few minutes, is there anything you want to add, whether it's about just trends with MSPs, cyber QP, additional thing you want to mention, or just the benchmarks in general?
Oh, I think like it was a bit critical of MSPs in the beginning, talking about like the knowledge gap. And I think it's important just to be open, like where we're at, and not trying to shame anyone or, like I don't want anyone to be scared to come forward and learn about this stuff or pretend like they know more, because it's harming everyone. And vendors like me and partners to MSPs, like we depend on you being successful, and MSPs unfortunately have a target on them, like not to be fear mongering, but the one to many nature, it's scary.
Yeah.
And we need to
One of the things I love about the MSP community is the spirit of sharing and willingness to help one another. There's, everyone's competing for business, but there's certainly enough business for everybody. And the real, it's partially why Zach and I do this live stream. It's about sharing information, and hopefully the rising tide lifts all ships, right? That's what we're going for.
Yep.
Yeah, I think that's great. And I forgot to mention this at the start, but we got Cybersecurity Awareness Month. Congrats to the kickoff episode, guys.
I think CIS offers discounts on memberships during this month, so just saying.
There you go.
There you go.
No, that's awesome, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the show, Jimmy. It was great to have the first vendor appearance talking about how they use the benchmarks, but also innovated it through a software solution. So that's really cool. Awesome to learn about.
I can't wait for the next fantastic forum, Jimmy.
Next fantastic forum. Definitely keep everyone on lookout for that. So we do try to do this every single week. Me and Jimmy were both traveling this Wednesday, whether it was DattoCon or Innovate for Us. So we will be back next Wednesday with a new episode. Looks like we're with Steve Pollock talking about a MS security guide. And that's going to be a big topic. There's some good legacy stuff in there. So looking forward to having you there. We got Kayla Williams and Felicia King coming up next after that. And don't forget, we do have our CIS Unlocked newsletter. So all these slides that we talked about today with the did you know, why it matters, we do a deeper dive in the newsletter so that you can take this home to your engineers and make sure they understand exactly what the CIS benchmarks may possibly disrupt or just improve. But as always, all of us here are very ready to connect. And if you are looking to use Senteon to help harden your workstation servers, we do have a free trial that you can always start out and give it a whirl on your own, or even just a quick gap assessment.
Do it.
Awesome.
Do it.
Appreciate the shout. So thank you, everyone, and talk to you next week.